Welcome to Beyond Tech, where innovation meets insight.
We're your hosts, Jackie Slaght and Jennifer Palumbo. We bring curiosity, clarity, and a passion for technology-driven storytelling to every conversation. Today, we're joined by two experts from our team at eTech Group to explore the power of feed studies in industrial automation, control, and intelligence projects.
First, we have Cassy Gardner, Corporate Development Director at eTech Group. With over 12 years in the industrial automation industry, a PMP, and an MPA, Cassy brings a strategic perspective to systems integration and long-term planning. She works closely with clients to ensure feed studies align cross-functional teams and lay the groundwork for business success and maximum ROI. She's joined by Chris Schleich, Director of Engineering at eTech Group. With more than 20 years of experience, Chris has led complex automation initiatives across industries. He brings deep technical insight into how early phase planning, when done right, can reduce risk and lead to smarter design and implementation.
Yeah, Jen, I really enjoyed our conversation with both Cassy and Chris. They had a lot of great insight. Did you know that projects with a strong feed study see 30% lower installed cost and 65 to 70% fewer scheduled delays?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty impressive number.
I thought so too.
That Cassy and Chris also just brought a lot of great insight into the feed study process, the importance of stakeholder roles being defined. They shared a few success stories and a few horror stories. And also just the general importance of beginning and what to consider before you begin a major project. And then, of course, I had to ask a few fun questions along the way. But I thought it was a great conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy it as well.
Yeah, I think everybody's really going to get a lot out of this one. There's a lot of practical considerations, some really great insights from both Cassy and Chris, and I always learn a lot from them, but I definitely learned a lot in this episode.
Welcome, Cassy and Chris. Thank you guys for joining us today. I wanted to start out our conversation with one of my favorite questions, which is, how would you describe your job to a 5-year-old?
Chris, why don't you go first?
This is the career you want to do, or you should just skip anything else. 5-year-old, I would say, do you have any toys that you can turn on and they automatically sing, or maybe it's a car that moves around you can control? Well, those require a brain, right? And my job is to make that brain, except it's for big equipment and factories. And, a factory that might make the safe water that your mom uses when she turns on the faucet, or maybe it's the factory that makes the medicine she gives you when you're not feeling well. And then they've probably zoned out by then. So that's my answer.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's a good answer for like an automation engineer or the automation space. I was thinking about this question, and I feel like for a project manager, I would. It's not that fun for kids. Chris's analogy is very fun, but I think of a project manager as someone who is trying to help a team solve the right problem in the best way. So you're staying focused on what you're doing, and you're not going outside of scope, for example. So, yeah.
Or
For
like
a 5-year-old?
Or like a
Yeah.
baseball coach,
Mhm.
right? There you go. I don't
Ooh,
know.
baseball coach, definitely. Or you could be like, hey, 5-year-old, have you ever been walking around the forest? No, this is going nowhere. That's not
That's not a good one. Oh, my goodness.
Well, I'm excited for
I was
this.
trying to describe my job to a 5-year-old, not that anybody asked me this, but I feel like I just talk to people all day and tell them what to do.
Yeah.
I've been reduced to nothing.
That's not true. The way you were describing it, Cassy, I feel like you could say your job as project manager is like the mom of the family, organizing what everyone does all the time. You are the chaos coordinator, which is often what I'd say I am.
The chaos coordinator.
That's what I thought
parent of
about
the
when she
family.
said that. Was the mom,
Yes.
does your mom decide whether you're having peanut butter and jelly or taquitos from the freezer? That's a project manager.
Does she help you get to school on time? Does your dad help you get to school on time? These are
That's
project
good.
management.
That's
Yeah.
good.
That's
Yeah.
perfect. That's
Organizing
perfect.
all the schedules. So anyway, that was a very fun intro to both of you guys. But what we wanted to talk about today on the podcast was specifically about feed studies. So can you, I feel like before we dive in too much, can you guys give an overview of what a feed study is and what it typically includes for a client?
Sure. Yeah, so feed study stands for front end engineering design. So a feed study is a smaller project where you are working closely with the client. It's typically collaborative to define the benefits that a larger project will bring and the scope of that project. So you're doing upfront engineering early on to say, what is it that your project is going to address, and how are you going to get it done the best way possible so that you can maximize your efficiency, maximize your return on investment, those types of things. And an analogy that I stole from Doug McDowell, who is a business development manager with us, is a kitchen remodel. Before you rip out the kitchen sink, you take some time to make a plan for what you're going to do to your kitchen. You lay out the scope. You figure out, hey, in my kitchen, do I want a brick pizza oven? Or am I imagining a different type of technology where a fridge will automatically tell me I need to buy milk? So you get to lay out those types of things and really define your goals.
Nice.
Chris, anything you'd add?
I like how some of the history informs what a feed study is. So front end engineering design studies apparently came out from the 1970s, 1980s from oil and gas industry and other large scale industrial projects. As things got more expensive, more complicated, and then within the case of those companies, even with global impact or planning needs, they thought, how can we evaluate options, confirm the project makes sense, and reduce the risk of our project before we actually commit to $1 billion construction investment, right? And
Exactly.
the feed studies I've done are more specific to automation system, but it really is that same mental model of what are they good at? Where's the right place to apply them? So I'm sure we'll get into it more, but I read about a bit about the history when I was preparing for this, and I found it really informative. So that's what I would add to it.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, that's like a good point into a question that I had, which is, so yeah, I didn't even know that the history of it and where it all started, but how do you see that has evolved in the industrial automation space?
Oh, I actually thought of this. I'm glad you asked that question. I forgot. A good reason, or not a good reason. One reason a feed study worked well in automation projects, particularly larger ones, is similar to that timeline. If we now think maybe 90s, 2000, 2010s, automation systems have gotten more complicated. Technology's gotten more complicated. Cyber threats have gotten more complicated. And then these systems have evolved to, particularly the last 20 years, to serve the broader business departments and disciplines in a company. So all of those kind of roll up to, more complex requirements. So if an end user's automation engineer, or maybe they're not in automation, is trying to plan a major project, there are a substantial amount of requirements that have to be considered.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that's a really good, increasing complexity, but there's also increasing opportunity, right? So if we look at,
Yeah.
the technology that as automation first hit the scene, it's very basic. It's sort of just, replacing relays. And now we get to the point where there is technology available to manufacturers and end users that can really change the nature of their business and can help them solve some of their biggest challenges. At a recent conference, I watched their presentation on economics and landscape, And in the US, for example, we have declining population. We have a very high demand for skilled labor that we can't meet. So looking at what technology can do now to address those problems for manufacturers or to help them adapt to tariff situations where, hey, I need to, at the drop of a hat, move my manufacturing to a different facility that wasn't originally geared towards making product X. There's really just a lot of opportunity that can help clients improve their business, meet their sustainability goals. It's very cool. But
Yeah, it sounds,
how do you choose? What do you do?
right. No, it sounds it. And I'm gonna assume that it's, I mean, to us, it's a common term. We do a fair amount of them at eTech Group, but do you find that this is a part of the vocabulary for clients? Do clients know what a feed study is? How do you broach that subject?
I think it depends on the maturity of the industry. And then actually, you know, we've each had our own careers, so it's somewhat dependent on experience. But in my experience, I did a lot of water, wastewater earlier in my career and never heard the term ever. And then I'm taking a tangent, but I worked at a very small firm, and we kind of figured out 6 or 7 years in, there are some clients that on larger projects actually aren't capable of defining the requirements so that you can even put a bid in, or you might frame the project, put a bid in, and then once you get through designing the thing and talking to the client, the requirements have changed so much that the original budget we had proposed based on what they told us is way out of date, right? And then I think, you know, if there are engineers that have been exposed to like big oil and gas or other projects like that, maybe they've heard of feed. But personally in my career, I didn't hear much about it from clients until the last 5 years. I don't know if anything's changed or I just got exposed to different clients, but a lot of the clients we serve do not know what that is.
That's been my experience also. It depends on the client and the maturity of that client. So sometimes I'm talking to a biotech startup and their founders are a few years out of college. They got some funding to start their company and they really don't have that background or exposure. And other times you're talking to large general contractors who are very familiar with formal project stage gates, their FEL, front end loading kind of metrics that they're kind of trying to hit as they go through project approvals. It really runs the gamut. So it depends on where you are, and you got to speak the language for each of those clients.
I had a client ask for one or 2 months ago, so they knew about it, but they work for a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical firm. Most of the rest of the time, it's been something that I've proposed to a client based on how the conversations are going about what they're trying to solve and how much definition they're able to put to that themselves.
Totally agree.
So they're typically coming to you because they have, sounds like, an increasingly complex project, and you kind of say, well, let's just take a step back here and do this before we actually talk about what the solution should be. What are some types of projects, just some examples that maybe that you guys have said, okay, let's wait a minute, let's do a feed study and before we start on that journey?
Sure. So let's see, it was probably 2 years ago now. There was a large pharmaceutical client, actually maybe more than 2 years ago, but a large pharmaceutical client who was looking at an aging control system in a number of plants. They had multiple manufacturing facilities. They had an aging control system. That obsolescence presented a number of risks for them to their manufacturing, as well as their confidence that they could meet patient demand. And so they started asking questions around what should we be replacing this aging control system with, and how are we going to be able to do that in the most economical way so that we don't disrupt manufacturing and we can achieve some larger business objectives about what we wish we knew from the plant floor right now. Like, let's solve the problems of today by upgrading this obsolescence issue, as well as getting closer to the state of the art. So that client they also had a diverse set of stakeholders across their different manufacturing sites. And it really made sense for them because they didn't have clarity on what they needed or what they wanted exactly. It made sense to run a feed study process where we identified the stakeholders, worked with them to lay out the requirements and the needs, all through workshops and collaboration, and lay a foundation for them to be able to make a data-driven decision on which automation platform they should put in at across their sites. So that's one example.
Nice.
Chris, did you have any others you want to add?
I did one a year ago that I pitched, and it was for upgrading some Wonderware platforms and interacting with the client. Was not really able to get a lot of definition about what was required, and therefore the pricing, might have a giant range. And he was ultimately just looking to solve his problem and solve some obsolescence issues so they could do some security patches. And I kind of pivoted after 2 or 3 discussions with them to say, hey, if we put together what we call a feed study, we can evaluate the risks of your existing Wonderware version versus the one we're going to go to, and do some planning of what testing and commissioning would look like, including durations. Because production is critical. That's ultimately what goes into the P&L. So they can't have their plant down for an extended period, working out bugs or other things with a brand new version of Wonderware. So we went and studied what are those risks, what are in the knowledge bases of these products, what do we need to plan for, what do we need to test ahead of time. Yeah, that was a recent case where
De-risking
pitched it, and it helped the process a lot. And one thing I told them is, hey, based on our conversations, this project may be this price, but I'm gonna have to call it plus or minus 30% with what I know. And their budgets are tight, so that was not good enough. And I said, if we do the feed, I'm gonna be able to zone that into plus minus 5%.
Oh wow.
And that's exactly what we did.
Mm-hmm.
Cassie, you said something that I liked. It was de-risk the project. That's an interesting term. I've never heard that before, but I'm not a project engineer.
Oh, that's one of the best parts of a feed study.
It's core. It's very core. Yes, the core benefit.
Along those lines. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cass.
Oh, I was just going to add, do you want to riff on that? I'm going to add another example, a different feed study example.
Well, yeah, so I was going to say that's like one example of removing risk, but there's probably a whole list of issues that come up on projects that feed studies can kind of nip in the bud. So that's where I was going, but feel free to share your example.
Perfect. That's a good segue. Yeah, I was going to identify there was another project that was about 18 months ago that we executed a feed study for, and the challenge there for the client was schedule. They were looking to aggressively get into production as quickly as possible. We had insane timeframes that we worked to meet, and the feed study was critical to laying out that plan and getting the scope right to get them, just exactly what they needed to be in production as quickly as possible, and lay a foundation for them to make future improvements and build on that facility. That was a brownfield upgrade that was another good example of taking a little bit of time to plan up front can really lead to future success.
Cassie turned that project over to me as project manager, so I'm familiar with it. And in that case, the client and their construction partners, no one spoke automation, had no history of it.
Yep.
So they had planned out the whole project and were just completely lost on what do we do about automation. What do we do? What's the bare minimum we need to do? And then what can we do also? And so Cassie led a multi-month process, digging into the machine drawings, looking at safety requirements, looking at options to integrate all these things. And client was very happy with that. Yeah. And then it had allowed us to put in a firm bid that, they could issue funding against confidently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I am super proud of that project, of me and of Chris. It was awesome, especially like it was very cool. I managed the feed study, Chris managed the implementation. We had an awesome technical team and technical leadership behind us in Nilesh, among many others, but it's a cool project, and definitely the upfront planning in a feed was key to delivering.
It reminds me
So
of like going backwards. What is a feed? Another
Mhm.
mental model I like, front end engineering design. It's often, depending on the structures, it's paired with, if you use this model, you're doing a front end engineering design to make some core decisions, evaluate risks, maybe update the decisions, and then you have an implementation project, right? These are
Mhm.
partners. And the implementation will pick up where the feed ran off and then do typically a phase of detailed design. So it's like a
Mhm.
lot of decisions already got made, but now we're going to talk about what are the voltages of the wires, exactly what version of the software are we going to use. So that a lot's been de-risked by looking at options and making decisions in the feed, and then the implementation um, is much more ready to go and typically has a tighter, more accurate estimate of schedule and pricing.
Agreed.
have you ever had any clients or experience or know of anybody who has completed a feed study that then they were like, oh man, we didn't need to do that. This didn't help us at all.
I have not heard that feedback before.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. Yeah.
Just
I mean, that's
curious
good.
if they'd be like, oh, this
They've
didn't
got
really
to
give us anything.
exist.
We knew everything already.
I mean,
They've got to
I
exist. I don't have any experience with that.
Sure.
What comes to mind though is a feed. I would argue requires kind of like a higher skill level to execute well, because
Mhm.
it's not a complete prescriptive formula that you follow every single time. A lot of it is engaging the client and pulling things out of them, active listening. Maybe you're in workshops and you hear the one guy you haven't heard from before who brings out a core requirement.
Mhm.
Does someone observe that? Do they notice that? So um, I don't know. Cassie can probably come up with a word, like there is some reading and reacting to the client, because ultimately you're trying to help them solve their business need in the best way possible, right? And what you the feed process you have on paper might not occur exactly 100% as written. And so you kind of got to be ready to take pivots, because ultimately we're just trying to help them.
agreed. Yeah, I mean, I think Matt, our CEO, Matt Wise, gave a presentation at the CSIA conference last week, and he talked about growing your business and a difference between a jazz musician who's improvising at the heart and the center of a team versus a conductor who is leading a very large team with different divisions and kind of different scope. And I really think about the feed study has a very jazz-like improvisational environment where it's like, okay, you have to adapt, you have to listen closely, and it's like you're playing, you're riffing off one another. So
Well, can you dig into that a little bit? Because I think we've talked about, why somebody would do a feed study of some of the benefits and pitfalls that you can avoid by doing them. But what does that process really look like? Who needs to
so
get involved? All of
yeah,
that.
absolutely. So as much as there is a jazz like collaboration that's happening, there is also foundations for success and a system and a process that you can follow to make sure that the jazz sounds good. So you got to tune everybody's instruments to the same plan. So for us, we have a formal process that we've laid out, which involves a number of steps. So that really the number one thing that's critical is identifying the stakeholders. You have to get all the right people who are going to be using the system or have needs from the system to be a part of the conversation somehow, whether that be directly in workshops or reviews of deliverables, things of that nature. So step one is identifying the stakeholders. And I should actually lay out, there's some major stages. Stage one is the framework for decision making. Stage two is actually evaluating the options against that framework. And then stage three is the kind of planning the transition into that implementation, like Chris touched on earlier. So within stage 1, we've got identify stakeholders, define your needs, your criteria. What are you looking to make possible, and what do you absolutely have to have from this system? Then you identify the options that you're going to evaluate against that criteria. And then you get to the evaluation stage where you've got a framework. You try and use some evidence and some data to understand which of the options in front of the client are going to meet those needs best. And once you've made that decision, you document that rationale so that as stakeholders change or needs change, you can understand how that impacts the foundation of the project. Then you move into the beginning of the plan, laying out the real scope for the project.
Yeah, and I'd say also, you know, I'm an automation engineer by background, and it's very easy for us to end up focusing on the project and the technologies. And a big part of doing a feed well is to make sure we understand what the business drivers are, what are the business goals. And if that's not coming up front, or it's not offered up front, drive the client to maybe put some of that on the table. Because we can make better decisions the more informed we're at. You know, a lot of us get into automation because we think the brain and building the wires and all that's really interesting, but you know, ultimately none of that exists if it's not solving some business problem.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, who are the people that you typically work with? I mean, what are the
5-year-olds?
Maybe in some cases, yeah.
Actually, that sounds bad. It sounds like I'm comparing our clients to 5-year-olds. I was actually just making a joke.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about the core system that runs manufacturing that system integrators are typically interacting with, there's a lot of stakeholders. So you've got the automation engineers, if your clients happen to have those. You have quality folks who are ensuring compliance or the quality of the product. You've got IT, who's thinking about all the infrastructure and the security. You have the top floor who's thinking about the business outcomes and the business drivers, like Chris mentioned. You've got manufacturing sciences sometimes, like MSAT, or gosh, it's really if you think about a business that has a manufacturing operation, you've got to think about the humans who are running that on the plant and then using all of the outputs from it. So the operators themselves, plant engineers, facilities, maintenance. Chris, who am I missing?
You know, if it's a large project or the budget is significant for the client, you know, procurement might get in there. I haven't talked to procurement during a feed directly that often in workshops, but that's typically part of the planning also, or it can be.
I have actually, in a couple of the larger feed studies, procurement was actively involved in laying out some of the criteria for decision making. So yeah, I totally agree, Chris. It depends on the
what
client.
made me think of them is and money people might be involved too.
Yeah, finance, project controls. Maybe there's a project management team as well. It really, the list of stakeholders can get very long. So if you're a system integrator who's thinking about trying to run a feed study, you have to figure out how are you going to manage all these needs and efficiently bring folks into the process.
So if I were a jazz nerd, and I like to think I'm a little bit of a jazz nerd, we're talking more like Dave Brubeck, Duke Ellington style jazz, more you know, orchestrated versus like a Coltrane who's just kind of off doing his own thing. Blank stares from everybody. Awesome, great.
love the attempted analogy. I'm sure some of our listeners will understand.
Somebody please tell me that you know those people.
The only jazz I know is from Anchorman when he's playing jazz.
That's a perfect example. More Coltrane, a little bit more.
I'm not sure how relevant that is, but that's where my mind went.
It's highly relevant. Us three were just in San Diego last week, so
yeah, exactly.
That's where Anchorman is from.
Stay classy, San Diego.
That's right.
So I think that we got a good understanding of the process, the types of people that you're involved in. If you're a client, what is the expectation on the investment? And can you speak to maybe what the ROI could be as well for doing something like this?
I'm gonna riff off the top of my head because I know we did prepare some stats and stuff, but I can actually think of a real example from my career where I'm gonna keep it very simple, but this is a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical project, and the end user just thought the price was too high.
Yeah.
And so a feed was pitched to make some core technology decisions that I think was, I don't remember, it was going to knock off like, oh, no. I said billion. I meant million. It was like 40 or $50 million just for the automation. And they just thought that was too high. And so a feed was pitched to knock 10 million off if the client would work with our team to make a few technology decisions up front so that multiple different options during the implementation project didn't have to be felt out and potentially designed.
Oh, that's a good example.
Yeah, I think and there's a couple types of investment also. So there's the upfront investment if you're hiring a partner to do the feed study, the dollars that you pay them, which it can run the gamut, and you as the manufacturer, the client hiring that partner, you have a lot of influence. You can dictate the budget. You can say, hey, I have X dollars to spend. Help me make some better decisions and make a more efficient project. Work to this budget. Or you can say, let me know what you realistically think it will take. So I have done feed studies that have ranged from, $5,000 to $10,000 for something very small, back of the napkin, to $250,000 for large multi-million dollar project implementation phases. So it runs the gamut in terms of dollars you spend. But the other type of investment that you have to think about if you're a manufacturer is your time. If you hire a partner and you send them to do a feed study off in the weeds, and you're not sharing with them the requirements of your team and what you actually need and the business outcomes you're looking for, and giving feedback along that way, you're really not going to get the value from the feed study. So it is a collaborative process, and you have to be committed in terms of your resources. Good partners will use those resources thoughtfully and efficiently, but you've got to be committed.
I would say too, since I brought up that story of the Wonderware upgrade where I ended up pitching the feed, like I said, that took my estimate on, I think it was 5 different systems. I don't remember what it was. Let's call it 600K.
Yeah.
And it took it down to 400K.
Wow, so not insignificant.
Right.
No, it's the difference between like having all the requirements and not. And filtering out some that might matter. That's another opportunity of a feed, is like you said, you want this thing. The more we talk about it, it sounds like it actually is not a big ROI for you. What if we just exclude that?
Yeah.
So how much time does a feed study normally take? I
forgot.
imagine there's a bit of a range, but
I was going to riff on that with the ROI. They vary. They totally vary. Because like I said, there is a process. It can solve certain problems, but it can be very customized too.
Yes.
And the one I pitched that I just told you about was, I think I pitched 120 hours. So it was, low 5 figures money to knock off 200 to 300K of an estimate. But the scale is going to vary depending on size of the project, number of stakeholders, complexity of the business problem.
Yeah. And that's the whole point of the feed, right? Is like, you're in a situation where it varies, it's complex, so you have to adapt. But yeah, Jackie, from a schedule perspective, I think you should expect to spend at a minimum a couple to a few weeks on a feed study, but it can pay off in the same way. It can pay off on budget savings. It can pay off on schedule savings. Like the work that we did on the large project where I mentioned schedule was the focus. Having that really detailed understanding of how we were going to pull all the pieces together and in what order to get them in manufacturing as quickly as possible was key. I'm certain that saved months. Like, we saved months from the schedule.
Big impact. Thinking about some trends that are present and emerging in industrial automation, system integration, things like this concept of IT/OT convergence, emerging technologies. So what are some ways that a feed study can help with IT/OT convergence?
Yeah,
Oh my
I think
gosh, the obvious answer is getting IT and OT in the same room.
Yes.
I mean, if anyone's an integrator or an engineer at the end user who happens to listen to this, they know what I just said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
absolutely. There's developing a mutual understanding, and sometimes a partner like a system integrator like us can act as almost a mediator, like an independent.
Yeah.
Maybe they see us with an OT bias. I think it depends, but we can help bridge the gaps between those two departments. And like ETech, we have a cybersecurity team, so that's somewhere where we can kind of be very helpful. But the other things I'll mention are like if you're thinking about the intelligence required to run your plant and to make your plant adaptable, flexible, meet those needs. Like I mentioned, manufacturers needing to shift where they're doing manufacturing due to tariffs on a dime, like on very short notice. There is an IT and OT convergence piece of that. There's a lot of complexity in the technology to make that happen. So feed study becomes even more important because you have to figure out how this is all going to work. And that's a requirement that could get missed, that flexibility.
If they're trying to self-perform,
Yeah.
makes sense.
I'm thinking he just reminded me of like one of the biggest problem projects I was ever involved in, like 10, 12 years ago. And looking back, it's almost like hot stove, Cassie. I
Yeah.
actually offered it to CSIA as a hot stove in 2019, but didn't get chosen. When I look back at like what made a big part of our project so bad, it was really actually the end user did not involve their IT at all in a substantial upgrade to trying to think, can I disclose it or not? Let's just call it a life sciences, a product that is critical for hospitals nationwide, gets used every day, and they just never got the IT department involved. So then us, Mr. Integrator, was like, once we engaged and kicked off, we were like, we need these platforms that you said you would build. We're going to need these networks you said you would build. And IT was just like,
What?
we don't have people. We don't know what you're talking about. We don't use that backup software, things like that. And actually, a bit of a tangent, but it kind of won that client back over because once I had kind of figured out that dysfunction, we did a lot of projects with this client overall. And based on that initial experience, I started giving the IT manager a heads up. Hey, manufacturing's asked us to upgrade these next 3 major machines in the next 6 months, heads up. And then more stuff got done. That relationship got de-iced some. Actually, now that I think about it, a feed would have helped that project immensely. Now that I think about it, it was very complex with a lot of stakeholders, and sometimes I guess going back to Cassie's point of being what'd you call it,
Jazz.
a jazz. What did Matt Weiss say? We're collaborators
Musician.
or something.
Yeah. Conductor versus like
Conductors.
jazz.
Conductor
Yeah.
is the word. Is if you can be very observant and work with high self-awareness when you're watching these kind of environments, you can help bridge some of these gaps.
Yeah, I think you're looking for leadership in your feed studies that has a really high emotional intelligence. I think you mentioned that earlier, Chris, as well as like that the active listening. Once again, those are just like super core communication skills that will help any project go well in a feed study, especially.
Yeah, and maybe in a workshop, you see someone who is a key decision maker and their body language is off. Like, hey, these last couple workshops, you seem like really not happy with the direction. Let's put it on the table. Things like that can happen. But IT OT convergence, that's the biggest thing I can think of is IT and OT historically have different missions and they conflict a lot.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not on the table. Hey, you guys are kind of on the same side. but you got to acknowledge like the missions you've been given are different.
Yeah.
OT, you keep the plant running and protected at all costs. IT, you keep the plant running, meaning uptime. IT is more about protection,
Yes,
um,
security.
security.
Vulnerabilities. Yeah.
Yeah, teams that are speaking a couple different languages, and you kind of touched on a few things, Cassie and Chris, both you, in terms of collaboration, some emotional intelligence. These seem to be good attributes for somebody, whoever is going to perform the feed study. Are there some other characteristics that you think somebody, when they're seeking out this type of project, that they should be on
Yeah.
the lookout for?
I mean, Chris, feel free to add, but I think a well-run feed study has some like basic principles, which are there's some formal project management structure around reporting. So if you are a manufacturer and you're hiring a partner to do a feed study, you want to make sure, back up, often that feed study is done on a time and material basis. So every hour that the partner spends, you're paying for. So you want to make sure you're getting value for those hours and that things are moving in the direction you want. So part of the process that we bring to our feed studies are weekly reports on the budget, like that don't just include here's what we've spent. They include a forecast for, hey, based on how this conversation is going and what we're learning about your requirements, your stakeholders, and your environment, we think we're going to have to spend more time in category Y, but you know what, to meet your overall feed study budget, we're going to lighten the hours on area X.
Okay.
So that you're managing that budget proactively and you're forecasting with the client all along the way, to get to that outcome that's really driving towards business results. So I think it's really, really important to have strong project management philosophies, strong communication around the budget and the risks. So you want a partner who's going to let you know, hey, we've understood this requirement, we've looked into the technology, and we're identifying some risk areas for the project that could lead to challenges. You may need to make some decisions or some trade-offs around this. And you want to hear about those types of things as soon as possible in your project so that you meet the overall outcomes and keep your stakeholders satisfied.
Mm.
Anything else you'd add, Chris?
Yeah, maybe taking just a different approach to the question. But yeah, like I mentioned skill levels, so I think you need a couple people that are really client centric and trying to solve their problems to help set the framework. And then depending on the nature of what's being evaluated or analyzed, you need people with experience or
Experts.
specific expertise. Like, are we comparing, should we use a Schneider solution? Should we use a Delta V solution, a Rockwell solution? These are very high level decisions. So you need people with experience that know what they're doing. This is not
Absolutely.
This is not an activity to put, say, a junior engineer out of college on.
Right.
They could help if there's like a bunch of IO lists or equipment diagrams. Can you please count these things? But you really got to have it tied back to getting a good framework around those the client's business decisions.
I like the client-centric highlight you made there, because I do think that's a super key factor for success. If you've got a team who really cares about the client and is like ingrained and like on the client side, that's setting the structure and the leadership for mutual success.
Actually, I'm going to emphasize that leadership. You need leadership in these things to make them work. And it's, it could be common in our industry. It really depends on the company culture, but the engineers who are really good at the technical stuff, and occasional project managers can get fixated on, we're executing this contract, we're executing the project, versus we have a contract to help the client. We think this is how it's going to go, but we're going to take the journey with them and adjust as needed.
To quote Nilesh Lal, you don't want a situation where everyone is doing the tasks and no one is doing the project. You have to think about the
Oh,
bigger
yeah, that
picture
quote.
just for a
That's a
second.
good quote. That's a really good, it's a very good quote.
Yeah.
Well, I've gotten a lot of great info from the both of you. This is pretty interesting to hear just the different impacts that feed studies can have. Shed a little light on it. When I first heard feed studies, I wasn't 100% sure what it meant, but full disclosure, I'm not an engineer. Is there anything else that you would add for people to consider when it comes to feed?
Yeah, one thing that came to mind is more my experience on these, and sometimes when I've tried to deploy it as an alternate solution to putting together a proposal for what's on paper, which, I mean, our firm and the kind of people we hire, we're very detailed. We try to get very specific with projects, estimates. We're not there to win the contract. I don't know, one of you might shoot me for saying that, but
That's true.
we're really there to delight the client. And,
Right.
And if we can do that, then the future work, gets easier to do. But so I have had a few cases where people can be hesitant to this because they don't want to deal with it. They're like, no, I just need a price for the proposal. And then it's either up to us to help them guide how they're not going to get a good price or structure from anyone, or on occasion we'll walk away. Say, I'm sorry that we can't bid on this scope of work. There's just not enough definition there. And that has happened, but it is a little dicey in the moment when you hear someone say, no, I really don't want to do a feed. And you're like, oh, but you really need one. Because I really like the concept because I think it makes project outcomes so much better.
Yes.
For the client. Sometimes it might actually be our implementation project ends up smaller, less dollars.
Yep. Maybe
less scope, but if they're happy, that's the best long-term for them, our business, etc. So I just want to emphasize, I'm a big fan of this concept.
Yeah, I'll second that. And the thing I would add that you kind of touched on it there, Chris, but just to draw it out is one of the other kind of hidden benefits of a feed study is you're issuing a smaller contract to a partner. And if you've never worked with that partner before, you have an opportunity to really see them in action and decide, is this the right partner for me? Are we truly complementary? And am I getting the skill sets I need and in the delivery that I'm looking for? So we as the partner are also, almost interviewing the client also. Is this a client that we can be successful with and really are meeting their needs? So it is a great test run for both entities.
You remind me of this form I've seen. What's the true cost of a mishire? And if you actually go through that exercise and itemize it all, it gets staggering. And so maybe E-Tech should make one of those for our clients. What's the true cost if you get the wrong partner, or think of a project that did not go well? What was the true cost of that? And then I think the challenge is on us too to prove that ROI, right? Because I've been in that seat a few times where I want them to say yes, but I don't know if I've really articulated what is going to be the value to you. Why would you do this? Because to me, everywhere I've pitched it, it is just a home run. It's going to be more efficient. They're going to get better outcomes. And I think in one of the stories I had, the first person initially said no because they just wanted a proposal, and it was a case where I would have walked away had we not done a feed, because there was just nothing to justify the time spent. And I vaguely remember their boss kind of got involved, and they were able to understand a little better what I was saying of, hey, the project's going to be plus minus 30%. If we spend whatever 18,000 up front, I can pull that down to a plus or minus 5% gap, and be much more confident about the schedule we can deliver for you. Those are my final thoughts. Absolutely.
Well, I kind of wanted to hit on one other thing, because then this comes from a different piece of content. You might have said it earlier as well, Cassie, but when we are working on a process article around feed studies, we are highlighting that it helps define the scope, but also possibilities that the client may not even be thinking of or aware of. So that there's like a benefit of that, and just kind of knowing where you are, where you want to go, and what you can achieve either short term or long term.
Yeah.
I think those are huge too.
To Chris's point earlier about having specific experts, um, a lot of times our clients have very small automation teams or no automation teams, so they may not even know what is possible, what is available to
That
them.
is very frequent. Yeah.
Yes. And so if you are able to bring in an expert in a collaborative setting like this, it can open up the world of possibility for your manufacturing and deliver on some really exciting outcomes that make a big difference for your business.
I thought of a hypothetical situation for a feed. So if we take it back full circle and we were making metaphors, it's like a kitchen remodel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if my wife and I go remodel our kitchen right now, the contractor is going to be wandering around wondering what he's going to do, because my wife is going to say we need a 40,000 BTU burner, and I'm going to say cooking's lame. We don't even need a stove at all. So maybe he would run a feed study to say, how about you and your wife sit down with me for maybe 2 hours before we commit to a kitchen remodel to decide what's really required.
And no one gets divorced.
Yay!
Yay!
Very cool.
Well, I think this was a great conversation. I appreciate your guys' time. I do want to end. I have a couple of what I call fun questions to kind of end the interview with. So my first one is, if you could have coffee with an inventor or engineer, past or present, who would it be and why?
Chris, do you have
Or
any
just a celebrity?
I'm gonna go. So I'm an engineer. So what do you say? Do you say Edison or Nikola Tesla or whatever? And I think I'm gonna pivot and say I would like to pick the brain of there were some psychologists who came up with a theory that ultimately led to Myers-Briggs and DISC and all that. So I think it'd be cool to sit down with that person.
That would be super cool. I have a hard time with this question. I don't have a great answer here. I think what I'll mention is I have a podcast that I love. It's called Ologies. I tell everybody about it. I'm like an evangelist, but the host sits down with scientists every week, and it's basically like a coffee chat about their careers and their research. And I just adore and love that. So I'm a very curious person. I love talking to people. In my role now, I spend a lot of time talking to founders and owners of businesses and getting to learn about how they see business, how they got started, and that kind of story is really fun for me to be a part of. So I don't have one person in particular that I'm like, gosh, I wish I could talk to so-and-so, but I always enjoy connecting with people.
I'll answer for her. She's like obsessed with biology and those kind of things. So I'm sure it's someone that
Yes, all the bioengineers who got started, for sure, there's some good foundation there.
Okay, I have one final question, because you guys are on our podcast early. I am taking ideas and request of any other topics you would like us to see on future episodes of Beyond Tech.
Who's the primary audience, would you guess?
Everyone. No.
5-year-olds? Then I might do one about Paw Patrol.
Excellent. Where does Ryder get the money for all these technologies?
Oh, you have kids. Okay.
I do.
I know Ryder.
I would say our audience is just anybody who would want to listen, but engineers, clients, partners.
Anybody in the industrial space
And-
that would benefit from discussion on automation, integration, but even just manufacturing challenges as a whole.
Topics we should cover.
Oh man, on the spot
Sorry.
I think
for anyone.
I think I've got one. I would be curious to hear about the differences in manufacturing I guess, technology, culture, landscape in different countries. So I would love if we could have folks come in and give us kind of like a cultural lens. Like, for example, actually, Gray Logics is a systems integrator from Brazil who I met at the CSIA conference last week. And I was super curious about how does their business differ from our business in Brazil? And maybe there's like a global lens. So that'd be something I'd be curious about.
The challenge is the
That's a cool
same or
idea.
I
different.
think our industry is tech adjacent, and
Mhm.
so our industry follows a lot of hype cycles. So any demystifying type podcasts, I
Yes.
look for that kind of stuff because
Yeah.
LinkedIn is just like, we can digitally transform everything, and you go, what does
Yeah.
that mean? And they go, we don't know.
That's a good point,
Maybe
Chris. If I could riff on that, the digital maturity model is a like an industry framework. So
Yeah.
I think that would be really interesting to unpack. So sorry,
Agree.
Chris, go ahead. Yeah.
if it's engineers, like we got a guy who
Mhm.
whose name is actually in ISA's batch standard
Mhm.
S88. So maybe it's a story. Where did that come from? What was it like?
Yeah.
How did he get started? Oh, that's a great topic too, Chris.
How can you select a good integrator?
Mhm.
Maybe something like that. Maybe end users would listen to that. I don't know. Kind
We
of
could
thinking
do
way
some
outside the
great.
box now. Maybe what are good traits of effective engineers? I think it's a topic all of us don't think about nearly enough, or you
That's a-
accidentally stumble into it 15 or 20 years later. You know the engineers you like,
Right.
you know the project managers are like. Do you have words for what makes them?
Why?
Because one
Oh,
thing I
that's
tell my clients, and it's true, but sometimes it actually lands, is like we're better at hiring than other
Mhm.
firms.
That's good to know.
Yeah. I think we could also do some like founder stories, like the
Oh,
you know,
that'd be
we
awesome. I'd
yeah,
listen
we've
to stuff
grown
like that.
through acquisition, and we've got a lot of founders who are part of the business today.
Oh, yeah.
And I would love to hear some of their early days. We could also do some hot stove stories, like,
I was just about to say that.
If we
problem
could get anybody to
projects.
admit those publicly, but I bet those would be pretty popular.
Jackie's gonna
I'd
say,
be
"What's your
thinking-
hot stove story that predated your e-tech career?"
Yeah,
exactly.
nothing to do with each at all.
Not with us.
Tell me about how you messed up, but not here. Well, those are great suggestions,
yeah.
guys. This was fun. Did you have fun?
I
Yeah,
had a great
absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.